As we begin our fourth episode in our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls and Two-Spirit People series, we want to remind you of Canada's silent genocide. Each episode, we review the heart-wrenching stories of these individuals, their families, and communities, exploring the systemic issues that contribute to their disappearances and murders. If you have not yet, please go listen to episodes 30, 34, and 38, where we spoke about the murders of Tina Fontaine, Loretta Saunders, and Dolan Badger. Join us as we amplify the voices that too often go unheard and strive to bring out meaningful change. Today's episode is a harsh reflection on the concerns and fears that shape the MMIWG inquiry and final report, a reflection on how Canada views and devalues Indigenous women in the past and present day. Today's tale from the Chesterfield is about the murders of Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, Marcedes Myran, and Buffalo Woman by Canada's most recent serial killer, Jeremy Skibicki, and an episode we call Discarded Lives. Hello, friends.
Hello, my dear. You're welcome for the wonderful dance.
We're trying things out.
Yes.
We're working on making this a bigger and better podcast, pretending to be podcasters.
Yeah.
We haven't figured out how to put the music in, so you get us dancing.
Yeah, you get us dancing. And you know what? As 30-something-year-old indie podcasters, I think we're doing okay. You know, it's not perfect, but you let us know. I recently was a part of the podcast support group world because we're all struggling and we're all trying. So I give a huge shout out to anybody listening from that group because it's a challenge, but we love doing it. I love being here in our Chesterfield again on Video Land.
Yes. I brushed my hair for y'all.
I tied up my hair because it is a very special friend of mine's birthday on Wednesday, but we're having a surprise party.
Don't tell him.
Well, by the time this comes out, he'll already know. So happy birthday, Kev. Love you so much. And this one just had a birthday as well.
Yeah,
I hope you listened to the Wendigo episode.
It was awesome. If you don't know, we do birthdays a little bit differently. I chose a topic for Alicia that meant something between us, and she chose a topic for me that meant something between us, and we told each other stories. So
it was a lot of nightmarish fun.
So we also have a bit of an announcement of why we're trying so many things. We appreciate all of your patience for the Vincent Lee episode. We know that when we released it, it was a little bit choppy, to say the least.
To say the very least, yes.
But Alicia worked hard. She figured it out. It's out now. If you listen to it prior to us fixing it, we're so sorry. We promise it's fixed. You can listen to it and not want to cry anymore.
Yeah, fair. Because there was actually quite a few listens. Like some people got through it.
We're so sorry.
And we're so sorry because we see the analytics and I clicked it and there were people that listened to it from the beginning to the end.
Thank you.
And yeah.
Try again.
Listen
again. You might enjoy it that much more. And we also today want to do a huge shout out to Ye Old Crime Podcast, who invited us on to do a cramp word segment. And by the time this episode airs, it will have already aired there. So head on over to Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, just like us. Big thank you to Lindsay who invited us on. It was so much fun.
It was so much fun. We won't spoil it because we definitely want you to hear it. But we had a great time being there. Lindsay's great.
Yeah.
So
she was the first one that when we did the interview, we said, we can do this.
Yeah.
We could do what they're doing.
Yeah.
We could become real podcasters.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Here we are trying to become real podcasters. So thank you. The only way that it makes us real podcasters is that you keep coming back. So one thing I will say that with the beginning of video, we are going to be putting these on YouTube as well. So we're going to also add a couple of other adventures from YouTube. We have one from New Year's Eve. We did a cold plunge. That's up there if you want to check that out. I want to very specifically say I did a cold plunge. Kayla put her legs in.
She scared me. I didn't think she was going to jump in all the way, and so I was more than willing to just walk in. But as soon as the cold splash hit my entire body, I noped out of there so hard.
Yeah, it's a good solid video. It's not very long, but it was our first crack at YouTube. But it is funny. So we're gonna be putting more up on our YouTube, and it's just Tales from the Chesterfield on YouTube. That's all you have to search. Tales from the Chesterfield.
All right.
Awesome. Okay. And with that, let's get this party started. So I want to make the distinction that neither myself or Kayla are Indigenous women. We are not telling these stories or cases from an Indigenous perspective or voice. We do hope we can use our privilege to lend our voices to raise these cases from the shadows and inspire change and steps towards reconciliation. I would like to acknowledge the land on which I live and work is the traditional territory of the many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people.
Rebecca Contois' partial remains were discovered in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada in May 2022. The 24-year-old mother of one member of the Oki-Coxosippi First Nation was living in Winnipeg at the time of her death. Before her tragic death, Rebecca was facing some challenges. She was experiencing homelessness and was struggling with addictions. Despite these difficulties, she's remembered by her family and friends as a kind-hearted and resilient individual who cared deeply for her loved ones. She was a friendly, soft-spoken woman who had a heart for everything. Around the same time, 2 other women had been reported missing in downtown Winnipeg. Marcedes Myran had vanished along with Morgan Harris. All 3 women had been last seen within a few months of each other and within a few city blocks of one another. Even with this information, as compelling as we would find it sitting here today, 3 missing Indigenous women did not alarm the police or general public. More than 9,300 missing persons reports were filed within Winnipeg police in 2022. And even more so, these 3 women, being Indigenous and the fact that they were last seen being in a notorious area for missing persons, their names were added to a never-ending growing list.
Marcedes and Morgan were both mothers. Both of these women were members of the Long Plain First Nation, and like Rebecca, were living in Winnipeg at the time. She had 2 children, and her grandmother, Donna Bartlett, described her as someone who was happy, smiling, and trusting. Morgan has been said to have lived a difficult life and had been experiencing homelessness the decade prior to her death. As a child, she was removed from her mother's care and raised in foster care. At 18, she became pregnant and had a beautiful daughter, Cambria. She would be the first of 4 children. For some time, the family lived together in a house in Winnipeg's West End. When Cambria was 6, she remembered returning home from a sleepover at her aunt's house to police cars at her home and bags of their belongings strewn across the front lawn. While she didn't know for sure, even at that age, she suspected someone had called Child and Family Services due to her mom's drug use. Cambria and the others spent years in foster care and in group homes.
Now, we've talked a lot about Child and Family Services in Winnipeg, even throughout the episode discussing the death of Tina Fontaine. Yeah. But there's some more to highlight here, unfortunately. Specifically in Manitoba, 9,000 youth are approximately in provincial and foster care, and that works out to being 1 in 40 people under the age of 17, and 91% are Indigenous.
Oh, wow. Again, it's always that feeling of I want to be surprised, and I feel that in my heart that I want to be surprised. Mm-hmm. So it's that conflicting, like, I'm not surprised. So I'm angry at the world that I'm not surprised.
Mm-hmm. And as we've been going through this series, I thought, okay, so we're highlighting cases of women, two-spirit people who have been murdered. In August, we'll be talking more about those who have been missing, but we should also be talking about the whys. And so in September, we'll talk more about this and other systemic issues that Indigenous people have been facing since colonization.
Okay.
So for Cambria, throughout her teen years, she was determined to spend time with her mom. And while they were forbidden from having unsupervised visits, she was quoted in Maclean's as saying, "No one is going to tell me not to see my mother." Often Cambria would find her mom covered in bruises, and Morgan would tell her about men in bars, hotels, and the shelter that would proposition her, offer her drugs or sex, and then beat her. When Morgan went missing, Cambria remembered these stories and wondered if her mom had fallen victim to one of these men. In response to her missing mother, just a few weeks later, Cambria joined the Bear Clan. Again, we talked about this group in Tina's story as well. They're an incredible group of volunteers that provide support and security to Indigenous people in Winnipeg. The group began looking for Morgan, and when they learned about Marcedes having gone missing and experiencing homelessness as well, the group began to look for both of these missing women.
On the evening of May 16, 2022, a man experiencing homelessness was scavenging in garbage bins and dumpsters for scrap metal, something he would often do in the cloak of dark. He didn't like rummaging through people's garbage during the day, and often people would put their bins and bags out before bed for morning pickup. Under the moon, he would have first dibs on the items, and he could do it with little harassment and judgment from the community. As he passed the apartment at 373 Edison Avenue in Winnipeg, he opened the bin and saw nothing inside, so he closed it up and went along as usual. Knowing that garbage would likely be put out throughout the night, he took the same walk back to check for any of those empty bins again. It was only 2 hours between the time he first looked in that bin on Edison Avenue, but he took the chance and opened it for a second time. Now, there was a black bag sitting in the bin. Upon further inspection, the man was horrified to find a woman's head. Fearful that whoever left the bag was still in the area and knowing that garbage would be picked up later that morning, the man quickly left the scene and, using his phone with no minutes left, was able to call 911. As traumatizing as this was, it was the moment that led police to investigate.
One of the first things that they did was run DNA, and they were able to quickly determine that the partial remains were that of missing woman Rebecca Contois. Armed with the name, they then began to try and discover her movements and affiliations. It wasn't long before the police were provided with a list of tenants in that building that the bin was associated with. On that list was a name, Jeremy Skibicki. This man was on social assistance, and this source of income was paying for the apartment that he was living in. Oddly enough, Jeremy had been able to add Rebecca's name to his lease. And just like that, 2 days later, after Rebecca was located, members of the homicide unit arrested and charged Jeremy Skibicki for first-degree murder.
But the question remained, who was Jeremy Skibicki, and why did he murder Rebecca and throw her away like trash? Not much is known in public record about Skibicki's early childhood. He was born in Canada and adopted in Winnipeg by a Polish family where he attended Argyle Alternative High School. Even as a teenager, classmates described him as a strange figure, incredibly tall, with a deep voice and gray hair. Besides his looks, he was aggressive with the girls in school, physically throwing one classmate across the room when hanging out at a friend's house. But around men, he was timid and shy. Ooh, red flag. By 2008, he was already known to law enforcement for charges of forgery. Over the years, he held a variety of odd jobs, but nothing consistent or stable. And by his mid-20s, this petty crime turned to violence.
Skibicki and 2 other men were hanging out at Shiloh Mission, a Winnipeg's homeless shelter, where he met a Métis woman who asked not to be named publicly. And for purposes of this podcast, we're going to refer to her as Annie. And before anybody comes for us in the comments, yes, you can find her name online, but we want to try and be as respectful as possible to everybody involved in this case. She's spoken out about Jeremy, nicknamed Jer or Scary Jerry, depending on his mood. When they met, she had been struggling with addictions to opioids and waiting for a bed to open at the shelter. On a cold day, Skibicki and his friends approached Annie, offering her respite from the cold at his apartment. Not wanting to stay in shelter, she went to his apartment.
Yeah.
And I want to stop and just say, this is why it's so important to have women's shelters or to have proper funding to support women who are experiencing homelessness, which is, I mean, always coupled with things like trauma, mental health, addiction sometimes. You know, here in our area, we do, and there's a lot of areas that do this, but they count a point in time count to see how many folks are experiencing homeless at a certain time, and they're able to look at what funding goes where, what populations are experiencing homelessness the most. It's so important to understand that women's homelessness looks so different from men's, and it's things like this. Women don't find shelters to be comfortable. They don't find shelters to be safe. They don't find shelters to be welcoming or home-like. And sometimes they would rather put themselves in precarious and risky situations to have shelter that night that is not a homelessness shelter.
Yeah.
A lot of shelters are co-ed. And so having men within the location that they're trying to stay safe and get support is not healing for them.
No, not at all. And it's at least they're with, you know, if they do agree, she knows Jeremy. So, you know, whatever his mood is, at least she does know him. So it's going to feel safer. You're also asking grown people to follow rules that grown people shouldn't have to follow. You know what I mean? Be home by a certain time, you know, eat at a certain time. There's, you know, I as a grown woman do not want to be told when I'm going to eat, when I'm going to sleep, when I'm going to, you know, what I need to do to be able to keep things over my, you know, I'm just going to either do them. It's, you mentioned the pit count, and I wanted to mention, so when I lived in California, we did something like that, and it was people would just go down into all the encampments and just and count. And the amount, the men that were down there was 70% men, 30% women. And that doesn't mean to say that there's less homeless women. They're just significantly more hidden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
The two got married not long after they first met, and Annie admits to being high on meth during the ceremony. She would go on to describe his angry outbursts where she wasn't allowed to use the phone, or there were times he would smother her with a pillow until her gums would be bleeding. He often would not allow her to leave the apartment, and when she did, he would monitor her movement electronically. There were many times she phoned the police due to this domestic violence. He would often tell her that he would do what he would do to her if he killed her, which included fantasies of raping her and choking her to death. He would specifically like to have sex with her when she would lay like a rag doll and would rape her while she slept. There were times when he would force her to take bed meds and would then sexually assault her while she slept. A year later, Annie was granted a protection order against him. She was truly fearful for her life after Skibicki told her, quote, he suggested he would kill me, or that other hands would abduct me and torture me or kill me or traffic me. And he told me he would put me in a garbage bag. Skibicki tried to have it overturned, but was unsuccessful. He was never convicted of any crimes he committed related to his ex-wife. She still has markings on her forehead from where Skibicki repeatedly hit her.
Annie wasn't the first. His first common law partner would also experience violence and trauma. During one incident when she was pregnant, he grabbed her hair and punched her in the face several times and then tried strangling her. He tried to get a protection order, but it was dismissed without reason. He was brought to the courts where he was sentenced to 2 months in prison and 2 years probation and required to stay away from his partners and not make contact for 2 years. He was ordered to take anger management and domestic abuse counseling after disobeying the court orders when he threatened her and assaulted her with a deadly weapon. Divorce paperwork was filed in May 2022, and for legal reasons, none of the other abuse allegations have been proven in a court of law. Both Skibicki's partners were identified as Indigenous.
Besides his history with violence towards his partners, a big part of Skibicki's identity was his affiliation and online presence in the community of Holy Europe. A lot of other podcasts we listened to and some blogs online made mention of their belief that Skibicki was an incel. That is someone who regards himself as being involuntary celibate and typically expresses extreme resentment and hostility towards those who are sexually active. Often, this will look like men who express rage at women for denying them sex, who are part of an online community that frequently fantasizes about violence and will celebrate mass shootings. While we can draw parallels on his crimes, past violence, and incels, we don't believe Skibicki was a part of this community. Based on his sexual activity, it's based in rape and what is known as sleeping beauty syndrome, where they prefer to have sex with someone who is not conscious.
Holy Europe, on the other hand, police were easily able to connect him to this group as he has a robust online presence. Holy Europe is an extremist far-right group known for its white supremacist and nationalist ideologies. According to its website, it's also known as the Alliance of Patriotic Parallel Movements of European Folks. Demands the re-Christianization of Europe and its colonies. They espouse beliefs centered around the idea of preserving what they consider to be the purity of the European culture and heritage. This often involves xenophobic, racist, anti-Semitic sentiments, as well as a strong opposition to immigration and multiculturalism, which is super ironic, living in Canada of non-Indigenous descent. They also often advocate for traditional gender roles and oppose feminist movements. Skibicki's social media activity includes posts and interactions that reflected these far-right, white supremacist ideologies. He even declared on his Facebook bio that he was an official member of Holy Europe. He often posted about denying the Holocaust took place, and he posted photos of himself with an iron cross, a known Nazi symbol. This itself says a lot about Skibicki's view on women, specifically Indigenous women. Its role should not be underplayed when discussing the violent acts and fantasies that involved many of the women in his life.
Yeah, I will say, it's a bit of a spoiler of upcoming, but you've posted some TikToks on how he tried to claim not criminally responsible. All of these actions beforehand, I want to make note to stick in your brains to show that that's not the case. He was obviously doing this well before he was trying to consider himself not criminally responsible. So with these discoveries within investigation into Rebecca's murder and dismemberment, police moved in to interview Skibicki. Over the course of a 20-hour interrogation, police used similar tactics to build trust between themselves and Skibicki, similar to that of the confession of Elizabeth Wetlaufer, a case we covered in episode 14. A good one. Please, if you haven't listened to it, go listen to it. It's good. They provided him Snicker bars, a sandwich, and pizza pops while he spoke about David Milgaard, a Canadian man who became a symbol of wrongful convictions after spending 23 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Drawing parallels between himself and David, attempting to cast doubt on the charges against him, and suggesting that he too was a victim of the miscarriage of justice. Trying to elicit sympathy from investigators, he discussed the well-known wrongful conviction, perhaps as part of a broader defense strategy. He continued to speak of his innocence for hours as he bonded with the officers, as he said, "I'm next in regards to the wrongful conviction." Skibicki spoke about his substance use and his struggle with methamphetamines, admitting to still using in small amounts and that he was living off disability since 2015. He's shown surveillance footage of a person in the area where Rebecca's remains were discovered. Skibicki denied the person was him. After hours of interrogation, sitting on a small black plastic chair, police show him an image of Rebecca's partial remains. As if out of thin air, Skibicki tells Detective Detective Sergeant Adam Danieletian his confession.
At this point, I want to express that you've done a very good job. You guys are obviously not stupid. I really just want to see how far, I can take things, because the criminal justice system is a joke, Skibicki said. The world we're living in is sick. I was driven to do stuff like this because I was so spent emotionally. I killed 4 people. Skibicki couldn't remember their names or where he had killed the women, but then later named 2 of the women. The watch he is seen wearing in the video was Rebecca's. More of Rebecca's remains were found at the Brady Road landfill.
As the investigation continued, it was determined that Skibicki had confessed to killing Rebecca Contois, and 3 others. But who were they? Cambria was still searching for her mother, putting up posters, looking under bridges, and checking encampments, but there was no sign of Morgan. In the September following the confession, she gave a blood sample to police to compare it to the National Database of Missing and Murdered People. And in December, police called Cambria, her family, and the chief of Long Plain First Nation to tell people that they believed Morgan was another victim of Jeremy Skibicki, as was the other woman they were searching for with the Bear Clan, Marcedes Myran. And there was a 4th woman, a woman with no name. Cambria was told that they did not find her mother and the other women's bodies. It was DNA that tied the women to this crime and confession. After providing this devastating news, they were also told that they would not be searching for the women's bodies in the landfill they believed to be in. They said too much time had passed, that 10,000 truckloads of garbage has since been dumped in the landfill, and that there would be no point in searching the city's Prairie Green landfill.
At this time, the unidentified woman was known as Jane Doe. During the confession, he did provide a name of what he believed to be that woman's name. However, that woman was found alive. Discussion quickly took place among advocates and Indigenous elders that led to the adoption of the name Mashkade Mishkade Ikwe, or Buffalo Woman, a name the Winnipeg police adopted. She was thought to be in her mid-20s, living in Winnipeg, and of possible Indigenous descent. This name was given to her during a naming ceremony so she would belong to a community in her death. The name Buffalo Woman represents the divine feminine energy, symbolizing purity, nurturing, and connection to the earth. Buffalo Woman is believed to be the first victim who, like his ex-wife, met Skibicki outside of the Salvation Army, where he invited her back to his home. Through DNA evidence, we know that she was wearing a reversible baby fat bomber-style jacket and cloth face mask. This was actually right when the government lifted COVID restrictions. So she was still wearing a mask on her face that you can see in surveillance video.
Okay.
She didn't enter the shelter or use services that day, and over the course of the 2 years have been unable to identify her or her remains.
Through the trial, we have learned that Skibicki forcibly confined Buffalo Woman in his apartment because he thought she was taking some of his things. He then choked her, filled his bathtub with water, and drowned her. After the murder and disposal of her body in a garbage bin, the items he kept of hers were thrown away or sold on Facebook Marketplace, specifically that baby fat jacket for $40. DNA on the cuff of that jacket is the only evidence police currently have linking him to Buffalo Woman. Skibicki described her as 5'4" with dark skin and short hair. We will include a photo of the jacket on our social media. If anyone has any tips or recognizes this jacket, we urge you to contact Winnipeg Police. Follow Tales from the Chesterfield on Facebook and TFTC Pod on Instagram to see it.
In the aftermath of these discoveries in June 2022, the Prairie Green landfill closed down for a short period of time. While this fact is not publicly disclosed, this was the time that investigators determined that the bodies of Morgan and Marcedes were likely within that landfill. It wasn't until December of that year when they announced it would be feasible for a full search of the 2 women. All operations on that landfill were paused on December 8th, 2022 by Premier Heather Stephenson. Cambria and Sister Kira went to Ottawa and quickly organized a rally on Parliament Hill, pushing for a search of that landfill. On December 15th, they had met with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who promised federal funding for a feasibility study on the search, which amounted to $740,000.
Back in Winnipeg, the victims' family members set up Camp Morgan, a protest camp along the Trans-Canadian Highway just outside of the Brady Road landfill, where Rebecca had been found. While small at first, as the word spread of the camp, supporters began adding tents, sheds, and stores of tools and propane. As the evening temperatures dropped to 26 below zero, they were angry by the news that the landfills would not be searched, angry by the police efforts to find their family members. That federally funded feasibility search did determine it was possible, difficult, but possible. However, the funding for the search was not guaranteed.
Landfill searches for human remains are complex. They're labor-intensive operations that involve a variety of techniques and procedures to locate and recover evidence. The first step involves assessing the landfill site's size, layout, and type of waste. This helps in understanding the scale of the search and the methods needing to be used. Detailed mapping of the landfill area is conducted, often using aerial photography or satellite images to identify areas where the remains might be located. Law enforcement, forensic experts, specialized search teams would then work to coordinate their efforts. They may also work with waste management professionals who have knowledge of that landfill operations. Initial site analysis involves collecting evidence or samples from the landfill to identify potential areas of interest. This may include soil samples or waste from specific sections. The search area is documented thoroughly to keep track of the progress and findings. There's a variety of search techniques. Teams may conduct a visual inspection of the waste, looking for anything that might indicate the presence of human remains. Heavy machinery, such as bulldozers or excavators, may be used to sift through the large volumes of waste. This process involves carefully separating and examining the layers of the refuse. Search teams can then manually sift through the waste using hand tools and screens to find smaller items that might be overlooked by the machinery. And finally, specialized cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains can be used to help locate decomposing bodies or body parts within the landfill.
Once potential human remains are found, forensic experts perform identification and analysis. This involves examining the remains to determine if they are human, and if so, analyzing them for clues about the victim. Care is taken to preserve any evidence found, including packaging and transporting it to forensic labs for further analysis. One of the reasons why they said they had halted operations was citing it was not safe for the teams to continue searching. But search teams wear protective gear, including gloves, masks, and suits, to avoid exposure to harmful substances and pathogens. Proper waste management practices are followed to ensure that the landfill remains safe and functional while the search is ongoing. Landfill searches are challenging due to the vast amount of waste potential contamination and the difficulty of locating specific items within the refuse. However, with meticulous planning and the use of advanced techniques, investigators can successfully locate and recover evidence in these environments.
And if I can find all this information out, somebody not in waste management systems, they can too.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, we had spoken to someone who lives in the area, and I had said, "Well, can they get volunteers?" And they had corrected me and said, "Well, sure, there's tons of volunteers, but there's no way for them to properly find. They don't know what they're doing. Obviously, I don't know how to search through I would love to volunteer and help find." Buffalo woman, anybody, but I don't have the proper tools. I don't have the proper knowledge to be able to do that. So, me just thinking, oh, well, maybe volunteers can do it. And they were completely correct in saying, no, we need, special. And if it was your family member, you would want that as well. Fair.
Absolutely.
They deserve it just as much as anybody else deserves it.
Yeah. And one such discovery was made just a year prior. There was a body of Toronto man Nathaniel Brettle. He was aged 57 and was located in Green Lane landfill near London, Ontario. His disappearance was treated as a homicide and was subsequently proved to be that of a murder.
Okay.
In a police statement, they said that the excavation involved multiple units, including homicide, police dogs, emergency management, and public order. Just like these 4 women, police believed that his remains got to the landfill by a waste management company routinely picking up the trash. Police were then able to determine which waste truck carried his remains, which happened to be from outside the city. They revealed the search is the largest of its kind in Toronto's history, even requiring some officers to complete volunteer hours.
The landfill sprawls over 321 acres and takes in about 800,000 tons of waste yearly. Police are quoted as saying, "It's essentially looking for a needle in a haystack. It's not an easy job. The mere fact they found a body is miraculous," noted former Toronto homicide detective Mark Mendelson. "It's huge, many acres in size, and it's very deep. As they plow over the garbage, it gets higher and higher, and you don't know how deep you have to go," he revealed. He added, "The odds were
What is that word? Infinitesimal.
Infinitesimal.
Infinitesimal. Sure.
Okay. The odds were infinitesimal when I conducted these inquiries, as the record keeping wasn't as good as it is now. They know what trucks come in from what day and what area they've emptied into. From an investigative point of view, that's very helpful. There was no delay in the search and no feasibility study conducted prior to the search.
So let's talk about Prairie Green landfill. This landfill, it's 4 acres in size. What it doesn't have compared to the landfill that Rebecca was found in is the technology of the waste management company. So in Brady's search, they used a drone, there was GPS technology and onboard video of the dump trucks and GPS technology on the landfill machinery. So this allowed them to know, based on where Rebecca's partial remains were found in that garbage bin, which truck picked up her body and where that truck dumped its contents in the landfill.
Right.
So because of the muddy nature at Prairie, police say that drones would not be helpful in the search, and that trucks that bring the debris to Prairie are not equipped with GPS technology, and that they compact its contents along the way. Something that the Brady trucks didn't do either. But what about the Green Lane landfill? Let's talk about Nathaniel again. Is it not just a double standard that law enforcement, based on who's worthy of being looked for and to what extent?
Yeah.
The Assembly of Manitoba chiefs say that it's been told no garbage had been dumped in the targeted section of the facility since June 2023. So going back to the MMIWG final report, I want to make a connection here. The inquiry said that too often murder investigations are, quote, marked by indifference, and negative stereotypes that result in Indigenous deaths and disappearances being investigated and treated differently from other cases. Differences that result in fewer solved cases. The refusal to search the landfills for the remains of Marcedes and Morgan and possibly Buffalo Woman can be seen in this broader context of systemic neglect and discrimination that the MMIWG inquiry has really highlighted.
Yeah. And in this one, we're looking, everybody should get the same. If you're dumped in a landfill, you should be looked for. Mm-hmm. Here we're looking for possibly up to 3 people. The other one was only 1 person. And that person should have been looked for, but it should be that we're looking for these 3 individuals.
It's about equality and equity. And in terms of equity, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody should be treated the exact same, but based on history, context, and the situation, that you get treated appropriately, respectfully, and with dignity. And that's why everybody has been so angry at the lack of police efforts in this case. You know, one solution to this, and we kind of hit it already, is that garbage trucks, the amount of cases where Indigenous women have been found in dumpsters and landfills and garbage bins is way, way too fucking high. I can't say that enough. Every single garbage bin should have a GPS on it. Yeah. If that was... there was such a short time frame from finding Rebecca's partial remains to discovering who it was to then discovering her body at the landfill. Because of those things, why aren't we prepping our dump trucks or garbage trucks with GPS? It seems like such a easy and financially responsible solution.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
It doesn't prevent, but it at least gives some closure.
It will give some closure and possibly some deterrent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Possibly. If, people... it's that idea of the lesser victim, right? So if these perpetrators know, okay, if I murder an Indigenous woman, if I harm an Indigenous two-spirited person, if I can just get rid of them and not have to worry because of all of these cases that we've heard of from this area that we've highlighted, even just this area. It could possibly be a deterrent. But unfortunately, they'll also find other ways to. People are going to hurt people.
Mm-hmm. But we have to do all that we can.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Girls, which released its final report in 2019, identified persistent and systemic patterns of violence and discrimination against Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited LGBT plus people. The report outlined how these patterns are rooted in colonialism. This is what I had a trouble with this one last time too. Colonization,
colonialism. Got it.
Colonialism. I did colonialism.
You have Italy on the mind.
Colonialism. Okay, let's. Cannoli. No. What is say it again? Colonialism. The report outlined how these patterns are rooted in colonialism. The report outlined how these patterns are rooted in colonialism, racism, and the marginalization of Indigenous communities. This refusal not only delays justice for the victims and their families, but also perpetrates the sense of invisibility and disposability that Indigenous women and girls often face. Searching the landfills even became an election platform.
During the 2023 Manitoba provincial election campaign, Wab Kinew, leader of the NDP party, made the issue of searching the landfills a significant part of his platform. Wab Kinew, an Indigenous leader and advocate, emphasized the importance of searching landfills to find the remains of missing Indigenous women and girls, reflecting those broader commitments of the NDP to address systemic issues affecting Indigenous communities. Kinew pledged that if elected, his government would allocate resources and take necessary steps to search those landfills. He highlighted the moral and ethical responsibility to bring closure to the families of the victims and to honor their memories. Wab's stance resonated strongly with Indigenous leaders and communities who saw this commitment as a crucial step forward to justice and reconciliation.
Heather Stephenson, the progressive conservative leader at the time who was running against Wab, expressed a different stance on the landfill search issue. Heather and her party raised concern about the feasibility and effectiveness of searching landfills, citing potential costs and logistical challenges. Her campaign focused on other strategies to address the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, suggesting that the resources might be better used in other areas, such as enhancing investigative processes and community support programs.
The differing positions of Kinew and Stephenson on the landfill search became a focal point in the election campaign. Media coverage and public debates highlighted the contrasting approaches to addressing Indigenous issues and justice for MMIWG. For many voters, especially those in Indigenous communities, Wab's commitment to searching the landfill was seen as a critical promise that aligned with the broader calls for justice and systemic change. Conversely, some voters were swayed by Heather's arguments about the practicality and resource allocation. During her election campaign, a full-page PC election ad said then Premier Stevenson's government would, quote, stand firm in its refusal to search the Prairie Green landfill if reelected. It ran in the Winnipeg Free Press less than 2 weeks before the election. The party also rolled out radio and billboard ads around this time, which were condemning during her campaign by families like the Harris and Myran families. In January of this year, Cambria and family advocate Robin Johnson spoke out about this campaign. Quote, to see your mom being used for a political game to score points and votes was distressing. It's distressing to know that someone would be so open and brazen about making these kinds of discriminatory comments to the point where they were willing to spend funds on those billboards and not put resources towards the vulnerable people their system is actively failing. Both women have filed 2 human rights complaints in response to those ads and the lack of resources allocated for the landfill search.
Fair. Wab Kinew won the 2023 Manitoba provincial election, becoming the first First Nations premier of a Canadian province. His victory was seen as a significant milestone for Indigenous representation in Canadian politics. Since his election, Kinew's government has taken steps to fulfill the commitment to search the landfills for the remains of the missing Indigenous women and girls. The government has allocated funds and resources to support the search efforts. This includes hiring experts, procuring necessary equipment, and coordinating with law enforcement and community organizations. The Kinew government has worked closely with Indigenous leaders and families of the victims to ensure that the search efforts are culturally sensitive and aligned with the community's needs and expectations, including those from Camp Morgan. Detailed plans have been developed to address the technical and logistical challenges of searching large landfill sites. This includes strategies for sifting through large volumes of material and ensuring that the search is thorough and effective. The decision to proceed with the landfill search has been widely supported by Indigenous communities and advocacy groups. The search for remains is ongoing, and the Kinew government remains committed to this initiative. 1 month ago, a public service announcement was made providing an update to the landfill search and to introduce Amna Makeen as the lead of the search and project manager. A plan is now in place for an off-site search in respect to the previous feasibility studies and health and safety concerns while ensuring a family-first approach.
Many of those following this case over the last 6 months prior to this announcement was horrified that the search was not going to be conducted and spoke about that outrage and hurt that this decision was causing. The lack of updates were directly related to the trial of Jeremy Skibicki. On December 2nd, 2022, the courts determined that this case would go directly to trial without a preliminary hearing. As time progressed, on November 6, 2023, Skibicki pled not guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder on the first day of pretrial motions. His lawyers were arguing that this case should be heard by a judge only instead of a trial by jury, which honestly, I do agree with. Trial by jury is really hard on the families.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. They have to relive things that they've never. Yeah.
So in Canadian criminal court, this case was automatically slated to be heard by a jury due to its first-degree murder charges. So in order to get this waived, it would require the consent of the Crown prosecutors.
So now fast forward to April 2024, and the community is gearing up for the upcoming trial. Skibicki's lawyers tried to have the first-degree murder charge of Buffalo woman quashed. They stated that since her body had not been discovered, nor do they know the identity of the woman, the count should be removed. We saw this successfully happen in the Picton trial. He was initially charged with 27 murders, but was only convicted on 6 counts of second-degree murder. One of his suspected victims was an anonymous woman referred to only as Jane Doe. Chief Justice Glenn Joyal rejected this request. On April 29th, the trial began. While some believed he would hold fast the not guilty verdict, perhaps trying to say his confession was made under duress, that police pressured him for the confession. Instead, Skibicki changed his plea from not guilty to not criminally responsible due to mental illness, stating, quote, "I was driven to do stuff like this because I was so spent emotionally. I killed 4 people. It was at this point, due to the change in plea, that the case would not be heard by a judge alone." He later details to police how he and why he killed these women, saying he believed he was called by God. Oh my goodness.
So this is why we just did the case 2 weeks ago on Vincent Lee and the murder of Tim McLean.
That is so, especially being in the same kind of area. This guy just makes me so angry. Not Vincent Lee, Skibicki. He makes me so angry because his case is so clear, and I know we're going to get into it some more, but his case is so, everything he does shows that he's criminally responsible. Mm-hmm. Everything he does leading up, which we've already spoken about, everything he does during, everything he says, even and I'm going to be the next wrongfully convicted. Like, everything that he's doing shows that he is criminally responsible, that he understands what he's done and that he understands the right from wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's it, is that he spent so much time online. And I mean, he knows about the cases of Picton. Mm-hmm. He knows about the death of Tim McLean and the non-criminally responsible verdict for Vincent Lee. He talked about Milgard and the wrongful conviction. He knows about other criminal cases in Canada that he is like almost drawing in. Like, I'll take this little piece.
He's trying to paint a picture.
Yeah, I'll take this piece from Picton's trial. I'll take this from David Milgard, and before my confession, I'm going to try and draw parallels to see how they react.
Yeah.
And the case of Vincent Lee was a huge one in Canada.
And in this very area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you haven't heard that episode yet and want to listen to a case where NCR was used appropriately in the Canadian justice system, I do suggest that you start with Vincent Lee, come back to us here, and we'll continue to talk about the trial of Skibicki. But absolutely, Vincent Lee was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was not treated at all, and then was led to believe that God was the voice in his head. He was having auditory hallucinations, that there was an alien invasion coming, and when he was on the Greyhound bus, heard the voice say that Tim McLean was the alien and to kill the alien. And so it's that undiagnosed schizophrenia, and we'll continue talking a little bit more about how they tried to prove non-criminally responsible in Skibicki's case. But it very, very much parallels that of Vincent Lee's story.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, yeah.
Inside the courtroom, prior to each day's proceedings, ceremonial smudging would happen. An eagle feather, tobacco tie, and buffalo headdress were present as a reminder that the victims were Indigenous. These items hold great significance within the Indigenous culture, taking prayer to the spirit world. Witnesses were offered the opportunity to swear in on an eagle feather instead of a Bible. And while this wasn't the first time that the eagle feather was inside a Winnipeg courtroom, it held great significance for this case.
During the course of the trial, the court was told about the physical evidence collected within Skibicki's apartment, including jewelry, clothing, DNA, and a blood-stained bathtub. They discussed the discovery of Rebecca's partial remains and how garbage collection halted for recovery efforts at Brady Road landfill. Hours upon countless hours of surveillance videos were retrieved and watched and played in court, showing the man disposing of body parts in nearby garbage bins and dumpsters. Again, you're going to various different dumpsters. You know what you're doing is wrong. It's not just, yeah. More than 2,000 hours of videos from home, businesses, and his hunting grounds, homeless shelters, were played. Details of his ex-marriage were discussed in court, even having his ex-wife Annie testify against him. As the trial went on for weeks, Skibicki's internet history was also shared in court, Googling definitions of a serial killer, beheadings, directions from his home to homeless shelters, and also garbage collection dates. But some of the more interesting, unexpected evidence was delivered on May 22nd.
While in jail awaiting his trial, Jeremy signed up to be a pen pal to a female inmate in Nova Scotia. Yeah. Remember, at this point in the trial, the jury has been dismissed, and Skibicki's team is trying to prove NCR. In the letters, Skibicki allegedly confessed to the murders of Indigenous women. He provided explicit details about the crimes, including how he targeted and killed his victims. The letters contained expressions of hatred, particularly towards Indigenous women, and depicted a deeply disturbing and violent mindset. Skibicki also described his plans and fantasies for future crimes, which included targeting additional victims and evading law enforcement. The content of the letters has been corroborated with other pieces of evidence, including physical evidence from crime scenes, physical evidence from crime scenes, and witness testimonies.
The letters have been used as evidence in the legal proceedings against Skibicki. They provide direct insight to his actions and state of mind, supporting the charges brought against him. The explicit confessions and detailed descriptions only work to strengthen the prosecution's case. Skibicki wrote about his motivations and the satisfactions he derived from committing these acts, revealing a pattern of predatory behavior.
Just like you've been talking about this whole time.
Yes. These revelations have highlighted the ongoing threat he posed and the urgency of bringing him to justice and finding him criminally responsible. The hope was that the disturbing nature of the letters and the clear intent and satisfaction expressed in them would have an impact on sentencing.
With all of the evidence lending support to the prosecution, the defense team still had the job of making the judge believe that it was Skibicki's mental health that made him not criminally responsible. They had previously completed a mental health assessment to determine if he was suffering from a mental disorder at the time of the offense. 2 forensic psychiatrists spoke in court, Dr. Shoam Das from the UK and Dr. Gary Chamowitz. Dr. Das went first and told the court, quote, "I believe the delusions and the psychotic symptoms caused by schizophrenia directly motivated those killings," unquote. He said Skibicki knew what he was doing, he was wrong, but he was compelled to do it. Very similar to that of Vincent Lee.
Yes.
So very similar wording in that as well.
But you can get a what's the word I'm looking for? If you're really good at something, you're an expert. This is just a battle of the experts. You can get an expert to be an expert in anything. You can find them and you can get them to battle it out no matter what court case we're talking about here.
Yeah. So the next day, Dr. Chamowitz took the stand and stated that it was his professional opinion that Skibicki did not have schizophrenia and that he was driven to kill through his sexual attraction to dead bodies. He believes he was antisocial personality, substance use disorder, and homicidal necrophilia, the latter being something that has been overlooked in this case. He told the court that Skibicki had shown a pattern of necrophilia interest dating back to his early teens. If you don't know what that is, it's attraction towards sexual intercourse with the corpse. Speaking to CBC, a criminology professional, Michael Arntfield, stated, quote, "People became increasingly exploratory and risk-taking. Once you're to that level of depravity, it's very difficult to control. There's no sort of antidote substitute for what you're doing in order to keep you fulfilled. Necrophilia itself doesn't make you NCR in violent crimes." Eric Beauregard, a professor of criminology, states, quote, "Sometimes it's very easy to miss that sexual dynamic that went on in the homicide. This is why a lot of these cases are not flagged as sexual when in fact they are."
Closing arguments in the month-long case were made on June 10th by the defense and Crown. The defense did not cross-examine the offense about the letters, but rather argued that Skibicki had long struggles with untreated schizophrenia that led him to kill the 4 women, while the Crown argued that he had never been diagnosed, saying the killings were planned and deliberate. That's the side I'm on. Skibicki never testified on his own defense. I am 100% on hate crime against women. This was obviously a sexual crime. He was doing this in a violent way with his ex-wife before, he got a taste and he wanted more. And
and I think he then continued to target, because both of his wife and his common law partner were Indigenous women. I believe they were both Métis women. But then he knew. I mean, you look at this whole long list of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and they are targeting Indigenous women, serial killers, all of these circumstances that we see of that we know of.
Yes,
because there are a lot that we don't know, is the targeting and the lack of care when these women go missing. Yeah. We saw that in this case for Morgan and Marcedes. There was Bear Clan who was looking for them. Family and friends were looking for them, but their names were just added to the list. Like, that kind of dismissive attitude is the pattern of what we see far too often in Canada.
And when you're looking at perpetrators, it's worth a shot, because people are, like you said, this list is long. This list is scary long. And if you are going to if you want to harm somebody, take a shot and you might get away with it. And it's sad and heartbreaking to say, but that's exactly what these people are doing.
And why we're advocating so strongly to highlight this type of series, because these are the stories that often go untold. So
look at Loretta Sanders. Look at Tina Fontaine. You know, it took their own community to find them.
Yeah, absolutely. And
it's taking their own community to find them again.
I know.
It's just like, and we don't mean to be laughing like it's funny. We're laughing because it's just it's
so frustrating.
It's so frustrating, and we're so frustrated. So I can only fathom the frustration within this community, and that's, you know, why we want to lend a voice. We may not be much, but we are trying, and
we are small but mighty.
Yes, we are small but mighty, and So
there's another Canadian serial killer. We have not talked about him or highlighted him on any case, but it mirrors this case a lot, and that's Sean Lamb.
Okay.
So he killed 3 Indigenous women and pled guilty, and the sites where he dumped their bodies was also using garbage bins and collection. The search in that landfill lasted 2 weeks, and they just gave up. So these are this is not just one case.
Yeah.
That's what we really want to be stressing here, and why you're seeing in social media, search the landfill. There's advocates, there's Camp Morgan, who are saying, we're not going to back down. We're not going to stay silent until you do this. This is a pattern in Canada. This is what we see. This is their lives every single day, and what they are fearful of when they give birth to daughters, when they are raising their daughters, when your mom is struggling, experiencing homelessness. This is their reality. As white women, we don't have this fear, or that fear is so minimized compared to what Indigenous women and girls are experiencing in Canada.
Absolutely. On June 11th, in a decision that reverberated through the courtroom and beyond, Manitoba Court of King's Bench Chief Justice Glenn Joyal delivered a verdict that brought some measure of justice to the families of 4 murdered women.
The courtroom was packed to capacity before a 10 a.m. announcement. Even we were sitting and waiting that day on June 11th. The amount of texts that came through, because all of my friends and family know how much I've been following this case, and that this was coming out. There was so many people in that courtroom. Every single seat was taken, with additional people standing along the sides, others waiting anxiously in the hallways. And to accommodate the influx, police officers in Winnipeg and the court staff vacated the gallery, moving to the empty jury seats to make room for more family members and supporters. Wow. Jeremy Skibicki, a convicted serial killer, faced judgment for the first-degree murders of all 4 women. With this guilty verdict, Skibicki now faces an automatic life sentence with no possibility of parole for 25 years. As Chief Justice Joyal delivered his decision, the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. He was declared that the murders were planned and deliberate, acknowledging the profound impact of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities in Manitoba. Joyal describes Skibicki as a man with, quote, pure racist views, based on his confession by the police. In his decision, Justice Joyal dismissed the testimony of Dr. Soam Das. He expressed concerns about Das's professionalism and gave little weight to his evidence. Wow. Conversely, Joyal found the testimony of Dr. Chamowitz to be credible and reliable. The Crown successfully established that Skibicki possessed the necessary state of mind for murder, emphasizing the horrific details of the sexual assaults and unlawful confinement inflicted upon these women. Justice was served, but the scars left on the community will endure. This verdict, however, stands as a testament to the resilience and determination of the victims' families and supporters who fought tirelessly for this day.
Donna Bartlett. The grandmother of Marcedes Myran waved a fist as she spoke to reporters outside the law courts building. I was worried, but I'm happy now. It's been hard, but it's been good. She said, he got convicted of murder and I'm glad of that. I really am. Now the next step is to bring my girl home. Jordan Myran, Marcedes' sister, told reporters told reporters she is flooded with emotions. I'm extremely happy, and I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Justice was served today, she said. Skibicki showed no emotion during the verdict. Speaking from Montreal, where the Assembly of First Nations General Assembly is currently being held, Morgan's daughter Cambria and said her family got its justice Thursday. Instead of looking at them like a name on a list, they treated them as human beings in the courtroom, she said. They treated us as human beings every step of the way, when the police and the previous government could not. Melissa Robinson, a cousin of Morgan, also said it's been a long road of heartache and grief. Melissa also said she was elated to hear about the judge's decision and called it's a damn good day to be Indigenous. Now we're changing the outlook on the way people see our women. Our women are not garbage, she said, and now our courts will not allow this.
So what's next? The conviction is usually the start of the end, but it only feels like the climax to the story for us, for several reasons. As we mentioned during the trial, the presented evidence to the judge from a search of the police that was carried... Oh, okay. No. As we mentioned during the trial, the presented evidence to the judge from a search police carried out in Skibicki's apartment. While it was confirmed that it found DNA to the 4 women in this case, Rebecca, Morgan, Marcedes, and Buffalo Woman, they also found DNA profiles of an additional 12 women. 9 of the DNA profiles remain unidentified by police, meaning their DNA is not on file with the police service. While this isn't proof of murder, can we be sure that there are no other victims? They have been able to identify 3 of these DNA samples, one of which has since passed away when Skibicki was in custody. While the court is confident that there are no other victims, police continue to investigate the unidentified DNA profiles.
The trial of Jeremy Skibicki served as a catalyst for calls to implement the red dress alert system more effectively and urgently. Advocates argue that such an alert could save lives by mobilizing communities, law enforcement, and media swiftly when an Indigenous woman goes missing. Indigenous women, girls, two-spirited LGBT plus peoples are roughly 6 times more likely to be murdered than their non-Indigenous counterparts throughout Canada. And in Manitoba, they are 19 times more likely to be murdered or missing. Inspired by the Red Dress Project, created by Métis artist Jamie Black, the Red Dress Alert would function similarly to an Amber Alert, but specifically for Indigenous women. During the trial, families and supporters of the victims wore red dresses and ribbons to court, a stark reminder of the lives lost. The motion to create the system was put forward by Winnipeg MB Leah Gazan, as was passed in the spring with unanimous consent, just days before Red Dress Day. Other North American jurisdictions already have similar alert systems, including Washington State's Missing Indigenous Persons system. The federal government has committed to putting $1.3 million towards the project over 3 years. While the project is only being piloted in Manitoba, Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Gary Anadasangari said there's potential to make it nationwide. Love it.
Yes, it's needed.
Yeah.
It's been over 4 years since the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls was released. The government have barely made any responses to any calls for justice. This crisis is getting worse. It's not getting better, as we continue to see with cases like this one. This is not something that has happened in Canada's history. Rather, it's something that continues to happen today. Unless we are making systemic changes to our laws and policies, it's going to continue to happen.
For vigilance and compassion, for truth and reconciliation. Our hearts go out to those affected by these crimes, the family, friends, and advocates who are still fighting for a search of the Prairie Green landfill. We will put a link to Camp Morgan in our Instagram bio, TFTC_pod. Follow us there for further updates on this case. We would like to urge all those who can to make a monetary donation to the camp that now stands as a permanent structure representing the lives of Morgan Harris, Marcedes Myran, Rebecca Contois, and Buffalo Woman. You can donate by sending an e-transfer to searchthelandfills@gmail.com.
If you want to continue hearing updates, follow Tales from the Chesterfield on Spotify or Apple. We're deeply investigated in this case, and we're going to continue to advocate for the search of Prairie Green and the identity of Buffalo Woman. We want to also thank everybody who has spoken to us about this case so very much. It's added new depth and understanding to the community that you are in and that you are advocating for. This has not been an easy few years for anybody who has been affected by this crime. And we hope that Jeremy Skibicki gets it.
Yeah. Yeah. And 25 years still makes me upset. It should be 25 years per confirmed. I understand that's the way that our justice system works, but I just don't like that you can murder 1 or 4 or 14 or 44 and still get 25 years.
That is true. There's no chance of parole. I mean, when we talk about Canada's justice system and the 25 years, like, it's not because they didn't want to give him longer. It's that's just the law.
Standard, yeah.
I agree. That needs to change.
And not that I hope that he murdered more women. I hope that there will be, if he murdered more women, that's connected, so he can further be so that can bring some closure and those families, because we also have to. Everybody wants to bring their family. If something happens to your family, whether it's violence or natural causes, you want to put your family member, friend, person who meant the world to you to rest. So find these women, find these men, so that their family and their body, their soul can be put to rest.
Yeah. How many times do you hear people dying overseas or on vacation, and the struggle to bring their loved one home is all over the news?
Yeah.
And people rally for it and do GoFundMes so that they can bring their loved one home from Mexico or Jamaica or wherever.
Yeah.
And it's just so...
The thought of these women remaining in a landfill destroys my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it should destroy everybody's heart.
Yeah.
Because it's a person, period. It's a person's loved one. It's a person's sister. It's a person's mother. It's a person's daughter. You know, I'm shocked that I'm not shocked. I'm upset that there's not more outcry to bring them home. Because no one should be. And
And I know, like, all of the major news outlets have been reporting on this case, CBC, Global, all of that. But it is the Manitoba news outlets that are really shining a light on this case. This needs to be nationwide. This needs to be an everyday conversation to say, what can I do to support this effort and not just pretend like it's not happening.
Yeah.
For the PC party to put out billboards and put out money, like Cambria was...
Double down.
Absolutely correct in saying, like, you are using my mother's name, you are using these women's names for your benefit in the electoral race, really?
Yeah.
Just, there's so many parts to this crime and the trial and investigation and all of it that is just, it's so flabbergasting to me. Is that a word? Flabbergasting? Flabbergasted.
Yeah, I think it's a word.
Flabbergasting.
Yeah.
It is now.
It is now. And I think that I honestly, I don't have any more words. I just want the person that we were able to speak to from this area really opened my eyes. And so I want to thank them. They know who they are. I want to thank them for talking to us, as it definitely opened my eyes in my own way. So my heart goes out to that community. My heart goes out to those families. I hope that if you can, you know what, even if you can't make a monetary donation, even just sharing, getting the information out there, you never know who can make a monetary donation, or who didn't know about it before, clicks it and is now has some further education. So even if you can't make a monetary donation right now, sharing it.
I always say that, right? Like, it's not always about being able to give money where you can, because I get it. Everybody's struggling right now. Yeah. If you can give money, it allows Camp Morgan to be able to do what they're doing and remain in the spot that they are at with all of the resources that they need. I can not imagine how cold it gets there, and winter is coming. Yeah. So continue to fight, continue to spread awareness, continue to educate yourself. That's my goal, is to continue to educate myself and be able to have the most correct information that I can to be able to present in episodes like this. So this is episode 4. We are going for 2 more months, August and September, in the series. I don't know where we'll end up after that, but we'll see. The world is our oyster. So come back next week. We are back with a haunted history episode, and then at the end of the month we'll have our next MMIWG series for y'all. Because we love y'all.
We love you. We love justice.
Hope you enjoyed this video.
Yeah. It's still strange being on video, but here we are.
I know. I try not to look at how I look.
Well, you know what? We're real. Okay? We're real. I have literal pink to make sure my hair is curly for later.
For Kev's birthday surprise.
Which will already be prison by the time this comes out.
He's going to be flabbergasting.
All right. We love you. Bye.